The Calculus of Collapse of Socialism, an analysis of the mathematical and game-theoretic failures of socialist economies. 1. Introduction, the Grand Economic Experiment. We are gathered here to discuss one of the most significant chapters in the story of our species. The 20th century was not merely a time of war and technological marvels, it was the era of the most extensive and radical economic experiment in human history. Across nearly every continent, cultures as diverse as the industrial heartlands of Central Europe and the agrarian landscapes of East Asia attempted something never before seen on such a scale. They sought to replace the anarchy of the market with the rationality of the plan. At its peak, nearly one-third of the world's population lived under regimes committed to the tenets of socialism. The promise was, and remains, incredibly seductive. Why should the survival of the poor be left to the invisible hand of a market? Why should we endure the waste of competition or the cruelty of the business cycle when we could, instead, use science, mathematics, and centralized administration to allocate resources according to human need? Yet, the empirical record tells a harrowing story. Without exception, these experiments culminated in economic stagnation, systemic shortages, and often total collapse. This creates a profound tension. If the theory is so rational, why is the reality so catastrophic? Tonight, we aren't here to discuss whether socialist leaders were good or bad people. We are here to look at the mathematical, financial, and game-theoretic architecture of the system itself. We will explore why socialism fails, not because of bad luck or foreign interference, but because it attempts to solve problems that are, quite literally, mathematically intractable. 2. The economic calculation problem. To understand the failure of planning, we must first understand the magic of the thing it tries to replace, the price mechanism. In a market, prices are not just numbers on a tag. They are a high-speed telecommunications system. They condense the subjective preferences of billions of people and the objective scarcity of millions of resources into a single actionable signal. 2.1 The function of prices. Imagine you are building a railroad. You need to cross a mountain range. You can go over the mountain using more fuel for the engines, or you can build a tunnel through the mountain using vast amounts of steel and concrete. Which is better? Without prices, you cannot answer this. In a capitalist system, you compare the price of the steel and labor against the long-term price of the fuel. If the price of steel rises because a new skyscraper is being built in a city 1,000 miles away, you know that steel is now more valuable elsewhere. You don't need to know why the price rose. The price tells you everything you need to act rationally. 2.2 The Misesian Critique. In 1920, Ludwig von Mises dropped a metaphorical bomb on socialist theory. He argued that under socialism, because the state owns all the means of production, the factories, the land, the raw materials, there is no exchange of these goods. If there is no exchange, there are no prices. If there are no prices, there is no way to calculate cost. Mises argued that the socialist planner is groping in the dark. They might know they need bread, but they cannot know if the resources used to make that bread, the flour, the oven, the truck, would have been better used elsewhere. Without a common denominator, money prices, you cannot perform the basic subtraction of revenue minus cost equals profit. You cannot tell if you are creating value or destroying it. 2.3 The failure of the labor theory of value. Many early socialists tried to use labor hours as a unit of account, but labor is not a uniform block. Does 1 hour of a brain surgeon's time equal 1 hour of a ditch digger's time? If you spend 100 hours digging a hole and filling it back up, have you created value? The math simply doesn't hold. By ignoring the scarcity of natural resources and the heterogeneity of human skill, the labor theory of value ensures that resources will be misallocated. 3. Information theory, why planning is NP hard. Even if we had perfectly good people, we run into a physical limit, information. 3.1 Hayek and dispersed knowledge. Friedrich Hayek expanded on Mises by noting that the knowledge needed to run an economy does not exist in a single place. It is dispersed. It is the knowledge of the particular circumstances of time and place. A factory foreman knows that machine A makes a funny noise when it's humid. A local shopkeeper knows that people in this neighborhood prefer rye bread over sourdough. This information is tacit. It cannot be written down in a report and sent to a central committee in the capital city without losing its essence. 3.2 Computational complexity. For the computer scientists in the room, the problem of optimizing a national economy is what we call NP hard. In a modern economy with millions of products and billions of constraints, the number of variables is astronomical. To solve a global allocation problem for a moderately complex economy using a linear programming model, it has been estimated it would take approximately 3 times 10 to the power of 26 years. 312 septillion years, using our current computing capabilities. By the time the supercomputer finds the perfect price for a loaf of bread, the weather has changed, a factory has burned down, and half the population has decided they want crackers. Instead, the data is obsolete before the calculation even begins. 4. Game theory and incentive incompatibility. Now, let's talk about people. Socialist theory often hopes for a new socialist man who works for the common good. Game theory, however, shows us that when you change the rules of the game, rational people change their strategies, often in ways that hurt the system. 4.1 The Ratchet effect. In a planned economy, the central planner sets a quota. If your factory is told to make 1,000 shoes and you make 1,200 because you found a clever way to be efficient, what happens? In a market, you get a bonus and your company grows. In a planned economy, the planner looks at your 1,200 shoes and says, "Aha, you were hiding capacity. Your quota for next year is now 1,300. This is the ratchet effect. The rational strategy for a manager becomes never exceed the quota. In fact, hide your resources. Use the slack to make life easy for yourself. This mathematically guarantees technological stagnation. 4.2 The soft budget constraint. In capitalism, if a firm loses money consistently, it goes bankrupt. This is a hard budget constraint. In socialism, the state cannot let a major factory fail. That would mean unemployment, which doesn't exist in socialism. So they bail them out. This is the soft budget constraint SBC. When a manager knows they will never be allowed to fail, they stop caring about costs. They develop investment hunger, grabbing every resource they can, whether they need it or not. This is why socialist economies are characterized by chronic shortages alongside massive waste. 5. Defining true socialism and the case studies. When we point to these failures, we often hear, "But that wasn't real socialism." 5.1 The definition. Let's be precise. In political economy, socialism is defined by public ownership of the means of production, central planning, production for use, not profit. By these definitions, the USSR, Maoist China, and Venezuela were absolutely socialist. 5.2 The state capitalism retcon. The term state capitalism is often used as a post hoc rationalization. It's a form of intellectual cryptozoology, treating socialism as a mythical beast that is never actually seen. When a regime is doing well, like Venezuela in the early 2000s, it is hailed as socialism for the 21st century. When it collapses, it is retroactively rebranded as state capitalism. 6. Historical realities. Let's look at the data. 6.1 The USSR. Extensive versus intensive growth. The Soviet Union grew quickly at first, But this was extensive growth, simply moving millions of people from farms into factories. Once everyone was in a factory, growth stopped. They couldn't innovate because they had no prices to tell them where innovation was needed. By the 1970s, the Soviet economy was actually subtracting value, using inputs that were worth more than the finished products. 6.2 The Great Leap Forward. In Mao's China, the Ratchet effect turned deadly. Local officials, terrified of being seen as unrevolutionary, lied about how much grain they were growing. The central government, believing these lies, took the grain to the cities or exported it. Consider the data from the years 1958 and 1959. In 1958, the reported output was 375 million tonnes, but the actual output was only 200 million. This led to procurement based entirely on lies. By 1959, with a target of 500 million tonnes, the actual output plummeted to 170 million. It was at this point that the starvation began. The result was the death of 30 to 45 million people, not by a flood or a drought, but by a failure of information. 6.3 The Korean Natural Experiment. Perhaps the most striking evidence is the Korean Peninsula. Same people, same culture, same history. One side chose markets, the other chose the plan. Look at the satellite photos of Korea at night. South Korea is a sea of light, a visual representation of billions of successful economic calculations. North Korea is a black void. It is the economic calculation problem made visible from space. 7. Conclusion: the structural inevitability. As we conclude, we must realize that the failure of these economies was not a failure of will. It wasn't that they didn't have enough smart people or good leaders. The failure was structural. Mathematics tells us they couldn't calculate. Information theory tells us they couldn't process the data. Game theory tells us they couldn't align incentives. Socialism fails because it asks the human mind, or even the most powerful computer, to do what only a decentralized market can do: coordinate the lives and desires of billions of people simultaneously. The lesson of the 20th century is that you cannot replace the invisible hand with a visible fist without crushing the very information and incentives required for a society to survive. Thank you.